Hi everyone, this is Koinzell here, and I finally have the Wanderer math guide ready for you guys, math guide 1 at least. So we'll look at his kit in detail here. I'll talk about the latest changes that has just dropped less than 24 hours since at least at the point of me publishing this video, it's less than 24 hours. So first off, we will talk about stats. So his HP is okay, not too bad for a Catalyst user, especially one that's not HP scaling. Attack is okay, base attack 328 is not like the highest where you have, if I didn't remember, something like 343. But 328 is pretty good for attack scaling character. Defense is a little low, but that's as better because it's Catalyst user. Now, more importantly, he has crit rate as his Ascension stat, so that's really good. Because for a crit DPS, typically for a 5-star crit DPS, you want the signature weapon to have crit along with the Ascension stat being crit. That will allow you to hit a much higher crit stats. So that's his signature weapon. It's basically a bell. What it does is it gives you normal attack speed as well as normal attack damage bonuses, which I'll talk more in detail about the signature weapon later. I have a specific session for it. So without further ado, right, let me just jump straight to talk about the kit. Ignore all this here because these are not updated. Alright, yeah, you can see right now the calculations are there. Okay, so this is his gacha splash. It looks really good. And now let's talk about the talents. After talents, we'll talk about passives, signature weapon, constellations, the entire kit summary, some notes and assumptions, energy generation, Wanderer's comms, TLDR, and finally what's coming next. Not just for Wanderer, but what are the other videos I'm planning next? Because I obviously cannot talk about Wanderer without doing another guide on Faruzan, right? But yeah, I'll talk more about that later. So talents, first off, the normal attack talent, Yuban Megan. Oh, I'm not sure whether the name has changed. I did not update. I did update the rest, but I may have missed the normal attack. But regardless, what you see here is there are some strike through figures because I've included the figures from the previous percentage, or rather, what I'm talking about, previous per version, the beta version. Okay, so you see that it's a slight nerf, right? 146.6 goes to 121.6, 127.8 goes to this and this and this. Charge attack is pretty much the typical of a Catalyst user in terms of both the stamina cost and the charge attack itself. So although his normal attack talent multipliers may have dropped after the latest changes, it's still pretty high. After the latest changes, it's still on par with Klee, who's really the only other 5-star normal attack Catalyst DPS. I mean, there are other 5-star Catalyst DPS, but they are not NA DPS. Like, you know, Yae is E and Q, not NA at all. But more importantly, what I want to bring out here is that the changes to his E that happen along with the normal attack change may result in an actual overall buff, depending on your team comps. Why do I say this? Okay, sorry, the E is already long. Yeah. So the thing about his E, right? Let me just explain how it works, and then we'll talk about before and after and some other factors like, you know, why I think a shooter is required for him. So skill damage is there's no change. What his E does is that it has an initial hit before he goes into his win forever state. Basically, he does a jump, kind of like Kazuha E press. You jump up with a AOE, and when that hits, that's the skill damage you're seeing here. Okay, and instead of landing, he goes into a win favor state where he's essentially floating in the air and unleashing his normal attacks. So that looks really fine and cool. And honestly speaking, RIP my wallet, because I initially intended for Wanderer to be kind of like my break in spending. But now, I think I might end up getting like C2 R1. Previously, his E state actually grants him normal attack and charge attack damage bonuses, similar to how Cell Q works, as per the structural talent figures here. You can see, right? It's a flat bonus. Okay, I should say flat, but it's a attack damage bonus. Okay, both to the NA and the CA. However, with okay, before I talk about the changes, right? There's also increased AOE on these attacks, and his charge attack also no longer costs stamina in this state, in the win favor state. But now, after the latest changes, what happens is that his E actually now works differently. It's no longer like Cell's Q. Instead, it's more like Yoimiya's E multiplier, where it's a separate multiplier. Okay, so rather than Cell's Q is now a separate multiplier. which actually is a big buff if you already have high enough damage percentage bonuses from other sources. Okay, it's a big buff. That's why the normal attack talent dropped. The talent multipliers dropped, because it's to accommodate for this change. And I can tell you, I'm fairly confident that it actually results in a buff overall. But I'm not going to intentionally do the math to compare because there's no need to. Unless for some reason Hoyoverse reverts their decision and goes back to damage bonus instead of separate multiplier, then I'll do the math for that. But moving forward for Wanderer Math Guide 2, I wouldn't do a comparison between this and this, I'll just go straight for this, okay? But I'm actually fairly confident that it is a buff in terms of overall damage, because it's a separate multiplier. Which means when you have high enough damage percentage bonuses from other sources such as his signature weapon or even Solar Pearl or teammates providing any damage percentage bonuses, etc. Because this is a separate multiplier, there is no diminishing returns. So instead of diminishing returns, you always get this multiplier as is. It's always 151.2% on the normal attacks, regardless of how much damage percentage bonuses that you have. This is why I say this is a buff in terms of overall DPS. But it's also a pay to win buff, because the change makes the signature weapon going from R1 to R5 better, right? Because at R5 of your signature weapon, you get 96% NA damage bonus, which initially with how his E work would have been like a huge diminishing return. It will really hit the point where it may even make sense to use a attack percent goblet, for example. But now that it's a separate multiplier, it's a no-brainer. Use a damage goblet. It's pretty much no-brainer at this point in time. You just use a damage goblet and try to get as much other damage percentage bonus as you can from other sources. Alright? But even with the R5, 96% plus a damage goblet plus some damage bonuses from teammates, right? You're still better off using the damage goblet. Okay? You need a lot of damage bonuses for it to have a significant diminishing returns. Diminishing returns are always there, but for it to be significant enough to use attack goblet, it needs to be very, very, very high, which he may hit if the skill did not change. But since the skill has now changed to a separate multiplier, there's no longer that concern. So that's good as well. But there's a trade-off here. Flat damage bonuses like Faruzan's A4, Yunjin's Q, they all now deal lesser, because initially they stand to gain from the damage bonuses, but not this separate multiplier because of how the formula works. I will always remember this because my Yunjin figures, Yunjin for Yoimiya figures had to be lowered because of this point here. So basically, you get lesser damage output from Faruzan A4 and Yunjin's Q, but his personal damage actually gets a higher output, especially if you manage to get enough, as many damage percentage bonuses as you can. But not to worry, I can tell you Faruzan and Yunjin are still good for him. Why? Because they still bring other benefits to him, right? Especially in Yunjin's Constellation, you have normal attack speed, normal attack speed bonuses, you have normal attack damage bonus as well, and you have Faruzan animal resistance strat. Like seriously, that's the most important thing that Faruzan brings to the table for Wanderer. They can nerf her A4, which they did. It's still fine by me, because the most important thing is the resistance strat. Okay? I mean, obviously, if it's higher, it's better, but it's no biggie. And besides, she was a little bit too OP to begin with the previous version. I would not really surprised by the nerf, to be honest. Alright, so this is with regards to the latest changes. I hope you guys see how it works. It's important because this is now a separate multiplier. So his personal damage actually gets increased, but flat damage bonuses tend to drop a later. Alright. Now his E allows you to adjust height as well, but I wouldn't recommend it during combat since moving vertically up or down consumes a lot of his Kyugoroku points. Likewise for his dodge that sprints during his E, which I'll talk more about here, but okay, let me just quickly say, although the flat damage bonuses, they now deal lesser, you gotta understand that you with a damage goblet plus some damage bonuses from team plus his signature weapon, right? Or at least some other weapon that has normal attack damage bonuses, it's still very high in terms. It's still a pretty decent amount of damage bonus. Okay, it's more like they are removing the most diminishing return part of it, which is why I say it's okay. It's fine that deflected damage bonuses now deal lesser. In return for this separate multiplier is awesome. If you have seen my if you have seen my videos since like Yoimiya time, right? If you saw my Yoimiya math guide when it wasn't sure when it wasn't clear whether her multipliers were separate multiplier or damage bonuses, it was very clear cut that the separate multiplier was better. Because I did both versions for Yoimiya. So I can tell you for Wanderer it's the same as well. I'm very certain that this is a separate multiplier due to the wording and specifically it's impossible for the damage bonus to be so high. This has to be a multiplier. Okay? So okay, now that's the new E. Let's talk about the fact that I think she requires a shielder. Why? So first off, any dodge slash sprint or jump where you adjust your height moving upwards during his floating mode, his win favored stance, it consumes a lot of his Q points, which is basically Sky Dialer points previously, the name. Now it has been changed to a Japanese name, which makes sense, right? Because he heals from Inazuma, his name should have some Japanese words here and there. Although I don't understand why Kazuha slash exists, but yeah. So, second point is his passive actually encourages you to use a dodge slash sprint after a NA slash CA string, or at least 2, 1 to 2. Maybe I should change this. After 1 to 2, NA CA string. So imagine if you use sprint to dodge attacks as well, how fast your Sky Dialer points or Q points will be used up, and how fast you'll be dropping on the bed onto the floor, and your DPS window is gone. So yeah, if you don't use a shielder, you're going to use up your points a little too much. Because the way his passive works is that it's a percentage chance to get the descent effect. If you don't get it, if you dodge, it will consume a lot of your points. And there goes your DPS window. Yeah. And I can tell you, he has no increased resistance to interruption in this state. And it's very obvious, right? Because it's not stated in the skill at all. But more importantly, he's a catalyst user. Most catalyst users' resistance to interruption is very bad. I actually saw a gameplay video where you can dash cancel the knockback while he's in his favor state and stay in the air. But the only thing is I'm not sure whether it needs to be the A4 sprint, because the video that I saw was a A4 sprint, meaning that it already had the A4 descent effect. So I don't know whether the normal dash can do that, dash cancel. But nevertheless, it's still a DPS loss. If you have the dash cancel, you get hit, right? You get hit in the knockback, you dash cancel to recover, that's DPS loss. Okay? And then the need to not dodge ties right back to your A and B above, right? Without the resistance to interruption, you can easily get interrupted. You have to do a dash cancel to recover. And if you do a dash cancel to recover without the A4, it consumes a lot of your real Q points again. So that's why I think a shielder is quite a must for him. I'll say it's basically mandatory at this point. You know why? Because he actually got knockback from a melee Hilicher attack. I'm not kidding. You guys can go check it out. There's so many gameplay videos for him, right? But I did see one where he really got knockback by a melee Hilicher attack. Okay, it's not even like being hit, being stung. It's literally been lifted up. And it's a normal melee Hilicher. Okay, it's not a Miwa. I forgot what's the name for the shield guy. Mi something Che, right? Or the Lava Che, the even bigger guy. Bigger Hilicher. So I can tell you, while Bennett, Yunjin, Faruzan hyper carry for him sounds awesome. All three of them buffing him crazily. But there's no increased resistance to interruption. It's gonna be terrible if you do that. I assure you. Unless for some reason you hit someone who can't hit you anyway. Yeah. Anyway, thankfully we have quite a few shielders that can work with him. I'll talk more about it in a passive session. Oh, just a quick note, right? If you do not consume any of your Kyugyo points during your E via dashes, his E can actually last about 10 seconds, 12 seconds with a Hydro, because of how his passive works, and 14 seconds with Hydro plus C6. Now, there may be a variance of it going from 10 to 9 seconds at the base, but I need to test it out to be sure. But this gives you guys an idea of how his E can last, how long his E can last. So let's talk about the Q. Q is thankfully very straightforward. Especially after Nahida's Q, I'm so glad to get a straightforward Q for my TC. Now it's decent damage, 250.2% times 5, so that's like what, 1250% or 1251%. It's a 15-second cooldown, 60 energy cost, so it's pretty standard. And you will always be using a animal support for him anyway. Should, because of resistance threat. So this energy cost is fine. Okay? And I don't even think you need high ER on him. And more importantly, it's such a straightforward Q. The only thing to note is that using your Q ends your E, if you happen to be in your E state. So you should use it either after or towards the end, especially if it's C2. Or for all, okay, C2 doesn't really need it to be all the way at the end, but I'll talk about it later in the Constellation section. So let's talk about passives. So first one, A1. A1 is pretty interesting. Basically, when you cast your E, the animation that looks like Kazuha's E press, if that comes in contact with Hydro, Pyro, Cryo, or Electro, you get these buffs accordingly. So Hydro, you get 20 more points, which is effectively 2 more seconds. Pyro, you get a 30% attack increase, pretty decent. Cryo, crit rate increased by 20%, obviously this is the best. Electro, when normal and charged attacks hit an opponent, 0.8 energy will be restored. Energy can be restored this way once every 0.2 seconds. Okay. It also refers, I am very sure it was for the Full Showdown and Tofukai. In fact, I probably forgot to update this portion here. But it's okay. In terms of the change, it's more or less the same. So let's talk about this passive, right? It's kind of taking leaf out of Nahida's book, to be honest. And the effects are all pretty decent. Even the Electro actually restores quite a bit of energy if you think about it. But you would use Faruzan or second animal with him, so I don't really think that the Electro is that important. I'll be straight up honest with you guys, I don't think that's that important. And as for the Hydro, it's longer duration, obviously that's nice, but his E has a 6-second cooldown, so it doesn't feel as important to me, unless you're like all out hyper carry. Because anyway, you also need to use your other character talents, right? And here's the thing about Hydro, right? There's no real great Hydro NA buffers except maybe Candice. Of course, you can go for the Hydro damage route, right? Just use Xingqiu, Yelan, for a lot of damage, and Yelan's passive will give you damage bonus, and that's very nice. So Yelan is a pretty decent option with him. Now, Pyro and Cryo effect looks to be the best in my opinion. Because, you know, attack and crit rate, obviously the crit is the best, if you think about it. Like this is equivalent to what, 6 artifact rolls? This is equivalent to 7 artifact rolls on average. Well, actually it's about 6 as well, unless you're unlucky then it's 7. So it's actually the same in terms of artifact rolls. It's just that crit is much harder to get the attack percentage. So naturally a lot of people will value the Cryo more. But I just want to say that Cryo does fall off the better your artifacts and crit stats are, so you can actually go for some other buffs from teammates in that scenario. Like Cryo is not must have. I'm probably going to get flame for saying this, but Cryo is not must have. But however, if your artifact luck is horrible, your crit stats are horrible, then yes, Cryo's benefit is one of the most important for you. Okay? So that's one thing to take note of. I.e., it helps if you are F2P and you're extremely unlucky. Let me put it that way. Now, Wanderer really provides a demand for the new characters, like Layla, right? Cryo, Shielder. I just talked about how he needs a Shielder, and how Cryo gives you crit rate, which is the hardest stat to get from artifact. So suddenly Layla's value increases. And maybe even Candice. Because Candice, if you build her correctly, she also gives like what, 40% damage bonus? Any damage bonus? And if you have C6 Candice, her Hydro procs also happen while you are doing it, doing the normal attacks. But I can tell you Yelan is still definitely better, and Xingqiu probably too, in terms of like sub DPS damage, if you factor their damage in as well. Now, one thing to note is that you can only have up to 2 effects, right? As stated here. So it makes the team comp building for him really straightforward, because ideally you just want 2 out of 4 above, and then your third character can be A, Animal Resistance Threat, Animal Support, Animal Battery. So in terms of shielders, he can pretty much pair well with Layla, Diona, Thoma. But I'm not sure if Thoma's Q proc can hit enemies while he's in the air though. Or while he's in the air. I'm not 100% sure about that. Now, technically speaking, C4 Tenfei doable too, Xingyan doable too. But if you have C6, especially if you have C6 Thoma, then you know it's an even better benefit for Wanderer, since C6 Thoma gives you normal attack damage bonus as well. Okay, so which is why these are the first few that I've mentioned. Now, obviously, Zhongli is good as well, even if it doesn't work with his A1, you know, because Joe doesn't give you anything here. He still provides the strongest shield in the game, Zhongli, along with Universal Resistance Threat. And if you pair Zhongli with Yunjing for Wanderer, you get Dual Resonance bonus as well, which also gives you damage percentage bonus. And remember, now his E no longer gives you damage bonus, it gives you a separate multiplier. So damage bonuses are better now. You see where I'm going with this? Although Yunjing does deal less too. So yeah, kind of a trade-off there. So I have to do the comp math to see if it is worth going like the Zhongli Yunjing route, or is it better to just go Layla with maybe Bennett. So you have your shielder, you have your healer, you have your cryo, you have your pyro. Sounds good, right? So anyway, I will definitely do a few variants of the hypercarry comp in future. But let's move on to the next passive, otherwise this video will take too long. Okay, so A4 passive. When the Wanderer hits opponents with his Fushodan or Tofukai, which is essentially his normal air attack or charge attack in the win favor state, he has a 16% chance to obtain the descent effect. And what descent does for you is that your sprint becomes free of charge in terms of the Kugoroku points. Oh, sorry, I got it cut off here. You want to consume any of your Kugoroku points, and you will fire off 4 wind arrows that deal 35% of its attack as animal damage each. For each Fushodan and Tofukai that does not produce the effect, the next attack of those types will have a 12% increased chance of producing it. So kind of like what do you call that? The Echoes artifact set, the one for Ayato. So in a sense, it's kind of like that. So let me show you guys in terms of the percentage chance. If I break it down, N1 you get a 16% chance to get descent. N2 is 28%. N3 is 52%. Now, I'm assuming both hits of N3 can proc here since the calculation is 0.1 second. It may not be the case. It may be worse than this. I have to test it out. But it's going to be hard to test it out because it's a percentage chance thing, right? You may get your descent earlier than this, or even earlier than this. You can basically get it at any point. It's only when you don't get it, then the chance continues to stack, right? So, basically, you are guaranteed a descent effect after 2 N3 streams. But it can happen before, and if you get it before, obviously percent chance resets. That's what I'm trying to say earlier. Now, if you are using his new artifact, then it's after 1 charge attack plus 3 N3, 3 normal attacks plus 1 N1, N2 for the guaranteed descent. Now, descent effect is kind of hard to notice right now. Hopefully they make it more obvious in terms of the animation and the graphics. Otherwise, I don't know. I find it kind of hard to see now, especially with everything that's going on in terms of action, right? So let's hope they make it more obvious. But of course, if you want to play safe, you can always do it after 2 and 3 streams instead of the moment you get it. Player's choice, okay? Now at C0, this effect is 35% times 4, which is 140% attack total, which is somewhat higher than N1, because N1 was like what, 1 to 1? Yeah, 1 to 1%. 1 to 1.6, so maybe you can say it's 1 to 2. So damage wise, it's not that impressive. And if these 4 wind arrows are considered E and not a normal attack damage, then it's really bad. But I don't think they will do him this 30 though. I think that the wind arrows should be considered normal attack damage. Otherwise, they are making this passive really worthless. Or rather, very bad. Very 30. They're doing it 30, right? So based on this, right, based on the above, right, to me, this is actually a passive that's just good to have if you're at C0. Why? Because the most important thing of it is actually not the damage. It's actually the sprint not consuming the Kyuguroku points. Because let's face it, right? Yeah, you're gonna have to need to reposition yourself in combat. So this will help with the dash cancel for the knockback too, right? If say you already have the descent effect from this passive, you get knockback, you do a dash cancel, it wouldn't terminate your E stance earlier because it doesn't consume the Kyuguroku points. I'll talk more about C1 in the constellation section later. Okay, so these are the passive. And the last one, which is the Mora expanded when ascending bolts and catalyst is decreased by 50%. Now this is awesome because it likely works like Raiden's passive, which means you just need to have Wanderer, and it will always work when you're ascending bolts and catalyst. It doesn't need to be an active party. So this is helpful. Now, although it's not during leveling and it's only during ascending, but it still helps to save a fairly okay amount, so it's okay. Now, let's talk about signature weapon before I talk about constellations. Sometimes I feel like Genshin devs kind of overcomplicate weapons unnecessarily. So let's look at the weapon effect. It's a long stretch again, long bunch of text again. So first off, you get a normal attack speed buff. After the wielder unleashes an elemental skill, normal attack damage will increase by 4.8% every second for 14 seconds. The buff also lasts for 14 seconds. Okay. After this character hits an opponent with a normal attack damage during this duration, normal attack damage will be increased by 9.6%. So it's not just over time, you can do actions to make this faster, and the increase can be triggered once every 0.3 seconds. The maximum normal attack damage increase per single duration of the overall effect is 48%. So at R1, there are 2 ways for you to go this to hit the maximum 48%. I'll talk more about it later. But more importantly, the effect will be removed when the wielder leaves the field. And using the elemental skill again will reset all your damage buffs. Okay, you will reset all your damage buffs. So the moment you leave the field or you use your elemental skill, you will reset all the buffs. Reset and remove, sorry. So like I said, there's 2 forms. One is via normal attack, hitting enemies. One is increasingly over time. Both can happen concurrently. But since the increase can only be triggered once every 0.3 seconds, it's likely that it doesn't work for multiple enemies hit per NA, and likewise, also for the second hit of your entry, it likely wouldn't contribute. So to simplify things, right, if we look at it as a 48% damage bonus being like 10 stats, you basically get 2 stats per normal attack hit with the restrictions I've just mentioned here, plus 1 stat every second. So let's break down when we get a full damage bonus. Assuming you're using the new artifact, which requires you to do a charge attack first. Charge attack plus entry is it takes up about 3 seconds. So how many stats do we get from that? We get 6 stats. Because from the entry, right? I already said that the second hit of entry doesn't work because of the 0.3 second restriction. So that's 6 stats, 3x2. And because it's 3 seconds, you get 3 stats, right? Every second. 1 stat every second, so 3 seconds, 3 stats. So this gives you 9 stats. You're almost at the max 10 stats. The next normal attack will actually give you the max 10 stats, i.e. the full damage bonus starts from N2 of the second normal attack string. Okay? N2 of the second normal attack string, you will have your 48% damage bonus. Now, of course, bear in mind that attack speed bonuses may change the timing above, at least this timing here. But I'm not going to go down to that level of detail. at least not in this math guide. So even on another artifact set, if you're not doing the charge attack first, right, it's still the same. Your full damage bonus still starts from N2 of the second A string. Because if you think about it, you still need to do like 4 normal attacks, getting 8 stats, and by the time you do 4 normal attacks, it will be 2 seconds as well. So you still get your 10 stats, starting from the N2 of the second A string onwards. Alright? Now the latest change from 12 seconds to 14 seconds is really for wheels to cater for the C6 plus Hydro Infusion A1. And make sure that your buff really lasts the full duration for C6 character with Hydro Infusion. Now I'll do the weapon comparison math in future to see if your signature weapon is worth pulling for versus other options. But right now, I'm not a fan of it per se, because you need time to build it up. But if you think about it, if you really think about it, it takes you about what 3 seconds plus 1 more normal attack. So it's actually only slightly longer than say Yae's signature weapon, because Yae's signature weapon requires you to cast 3 E's as well. The only difference is it's easier for me math-wise because Yae's first hit happens after your 3 E's are cast anyway. But for this signature weapon, for Wanderer's signature weapon, he is already dealing damage before that. So yeah, it depends on whether I will do the math to the extent, right, to be accurate to the number of so-called stats on this weapon. Let's see how that goes. So I'll probably end up doing it. Alright, so that's the signature weapon. We talked about the talents, passive, and signature weapon. Let's talk about constellations. C1, Shoban, Ostentatious Plumage. When in the wind favored state, the attack speed is increased by 10%. The normal attack and charge attack during his E stance mode. And additionally, it buffs the A4. The one that you do a dash during his E and it fires 4 wind arrows. Now, these 4 wind arrows, instead of 35%, they get an additional 25% now to become 60%. So this is actually a big increase, but only for this passive talent. So like I said, it looks okay, or you can even go so far as to say that it looks good, but it's actually not very high value. I have to do the math to be sure, but based on my experience doing so many math guides thus far, I gotta say that yes, it increased the A4 effect quite significantly. In fact, it's a 71% boost right now versus previous beta version where it was 15 instead of 25%. That was like 43%. Okay, so 71%. But the thing is, his A4 damage contribution out of all his action is not very high to begin with. Because if you think about how high his normal attack talent multipliers are, right, and how much he's spamming his normal attacks, you know that this A4 doesn't contribute a big percentage of the overall damage output. But if I were to give a high level guesstimate, my guess is that in terms of the previous beta version versus now, right, the 15 and 25%, I'll say it's more like the C0 C1 goes from maybe less than 10% to 10 to 15%. In terms of the overall DPS from this latest change. And now I've been talking about the passive. The 10% attack speed is good as well, especially for building up his signature weapon stats and also the A4 effect, right? And 10% attack speed will probably increase your overall damage by 1 to 2 normal attacks, typically. So this is fairly decent, and coupled with your signature weapon, you have like what 20% attack speed increase, so that's nice. Now C2 has a huge bonus. Basically, when in your E state, right, his Q will have a damage increase. Is this percentage figure? Right now it's 4%, it used to be 3%. Like 1 or 2 days ago it was just 3%. But the latest beta version is 4%. Per point of difference between the max amount of Kugoroku points contrasted with your present capacity. So what it's trying to say here is, let's say if you don't have Hydro Infusion with 100 points, if your max capacity should be 100 points, right? But your present capacity is 40, for example, it means that you have 60 points of difference. 60 times 4 gives you 240, but the max is 200, right? So from this is very straightforward. As long as you are down 50 points, 50 Kugoroku points, you get your maximum damage bonus here from this C2. Which if you don't have Hydro Efficient, you don't have C6, basically it means that when your bar is less than half. Because when you have his E mode, he has a special E bar there. He has a special blue bar like that looks like the Seminar bar, but it's blue in color instead of yellow. And that blue bar, as long as less than 50%, your C2 will be at its max damage bonus. So I have to say that this latest change is really good, right? When it goes from 3 to 4 and 150 to 200, it's an even bigger damage bonus. Providing 200% damage bonus is pretty damn strong. And this is easily fulfilled by using your Q when your E bar is less than 50%. Okay? But remember, this is his Q, not his normal attack. So it remains to be seen on the overall impact to his overall DPS. Because his Q is not going to have as high of a damage bonus as opposed to his normal attack. Right? Although I guess this is where Solar Pearl shines. Or performs slightly better. But it's not going to be better than the signature weapon. Okay, let's be clear. Signature weapon will always be the best weapon. It's a matter of how much better it is than the next option. But regardless, a search option is definitely welcome for his C2. His C2 basically makes it such that he's not just an NA DPS, it's not a sustained DPS. He also has a search option. And we all know search DPS is good, right? Just like Ayaka, look at 66 Yelan. Now, let's talk about C3. C3 increases his Q based on the latest Chinese description, which if you combine it with the C2 effect, is actually more impactful or better than getting the 3 talent levels on E, because the talent scaling on his E, the percentage figure is a little small, because it's a separate multiplier, so it has to be smaller. But I can tell you, if it was damage bonus, it would be even worse off because of diminishing returns. Oh, and by the way, the English description in terms of the constellation icon is actually already updated to show the Q icon. It's just that the text is, for some reason, it's not updated to show Q yet. So for the purpose of my description or my analysis here, I'll just take it that it's the Q. Okay, so C3 is Q, not E. C4, when casting his E, if you trigger the passive talent, which is the elemental infusion, right? C4 basically gives you a increase, a +1 of the elemental type buff. However, the third elemental buff is a random untriggered enhancement effect. Because since the A1 passive max is 2 by default, assuming both elements are on the enemies you hit with its E, it can be one different element per enemy. It doesn't have to be the two same elements. Okay. There's no way to control and fix this C4 to a specific element that you want. There's just no way. It's RNG. It's a 50-50. Versus the other two that are not triggered. The other two effects that are not triggered, right? It's a 50-50% chance to get either one. So honestly, this is not a great constellation. I'll be just straightforward and say that this is not a great constellation, right? Because it's random. So to me, it's just good to have. I mean, sure, if you somehow manage to get cryo where you're not using cryo, then that's awesome, right? Or even pyro. So it's not that great. I mean, if you get electro, sure, it helps. But if you build your character correctly, you shouldn't be relying on the electro effect. That's number one. As for hydro duration, like I said, E is on a 6-second cooldown. Obviously, if it's extended, sure, why not? But yeah, it's not that impactful. Maybe C4 would be greater if you intend to use him with Zhongli and Yunjing, where you are not triggering any of the effect, right? But the problem is that if you're using Zhongli and Yunjing, you can't even get this thing triggered, so C4 doesn't work. Unless the enemies have talent, have elemental application for other stuff, like maybe they are standing in water or something. So yeah, C4 is not great, and C4 is also useless in a Zhongli Yunjing comp. Assuming it's Zhongli Yunjing and Faruzan or C4 Jin. So C4 is not great. Not great. Now C5 obviously is the worst constellation because all it does is increasing the E10 level by 3. While it does give you the multiplier effect, but the skill is not that high, and obviously the biggest problem is the percentage boost that you get is typically the lowest at C5. Alright, Let's talk about C6. C6 actually got a buff from the latest change. Now let me talk about how it works. So when the Wanderer actively hits opponents with Fushodan, only Fushodan, not Tofukai, which means only the normal attacks and not the charge attacks for his C6. This happens, okay? It deals an additional instance of Kyuko Fushodan at the position hit, dealing 40% of the attack's original damage. This damage will be considered normal attack damage. On top of dealing damage, when the Wanderer falls below 40 Kugoroku points, you restore 4 points to him every time this effect is triggered. Can be restored once every 0.2 seconds and maximum 5 times within 1 win favor duration, i.e. it's 4 points times 5, which is 20 points. So just like the Hydro effect, but it can stack on top of the Hydro effect, which is why I mentioned earlier, right? If you have C6 plus Hydro, it's 14 seconds to your E. Now, more importantly, it's a very good C6 boost because in case it isn't clear, it's 40% of the attack's original damage, i.e. it's always 40% boost, at least for his normal attacks. Whereas previously, it was an instance of 40% attack as animal damage. Previously, if I assume level 9 normal attack with the previous normal attack talent multipliers, at M1 it's actually only a 27% increase, not 40% increase, right? Because it's 40% attack versus 146.6%. And then you have N2 where it's a 31% increase. And for N3, it's slightly better, it's actually a 42% increase. Because I check out the gameplay videos, it does trigger twice. So it's 40% attack adds 2. So it's a 42% increase. So although N3 is a slight drop versus the 40% of the original damage, it's a big increase for its N1 and N2. Right? 40 versus 27, 40 versus 31. So this actually makes his C6 better. And even without latest changes, C6 still allows you to extend your DPS window by another 2 seconds, which is good if you have buffs that last for the extended period, right? Which is, his signature weapon. Okay, first thing I can think of is signature weapon. Obviously, there can be other buffs. And since it's additional instances, it should help overcome ICD and proc more swords too, right? Because it's an additional instance. It's not increasing the damage. It's an additional separate animal application. So it should help with swords, although sword isn't like a big part of his damage output, but it helps. Unless they have special ICD like Cole's where it's just time based instead of hits. So one more thing. Due to the wording, an additional instance of Fushodan, which we already know that Fushodan is an AoE attack, right? So when it's an additional instance of Fushodan, does it mean that it's another additional AoE attack per enemy? And henceforth having quadratic scaling? So this is the problem with the wording. Okay? Now, I think it's way too imba if it has quadratic scaling, to be honest. So I'll just assume that it's not. It's just a wording issue. Okay? All they mean is an additional instance of a single target animal damage without AoE. Because when they say it's a Fushodan, it means that there's AoE. Because that's the way his Fushodan works. It's an AoE. So, yeah. I'll assume that there's no quadratic scaling and it's just a wording issue. Otherwise, it's way too OP for his C6. Because it scales crazily when you have 2+ enemies, just like Nilou's multiple calls. I think it shouldn't be that in bar, right? Yeah, I think. Alright. I will do math eventually to see the value of his C6, and I'll assume that there's no quadratic scaling, okay? So in terms of the constellations, I think other than his C6 and probably his C2, his other constellations don't look that great in my opinion. C1 may have some potential, but I need to do the detailed math to be sure. I expect C3 and C5 to be pretty bad, since they aren't contributing much to overall DPS. They don't contribute to his NA DPS. But C3 may be better than I'm expecting. If you consider it coupled with the new C2, maybe it will be better than I'm expecting. But yeah, before doing the detailed math, I think C0R1 or C2R1 should be good enough targets. And if I do the weapon comparison math and his signature weapon is not significantly greater than other weapons that you may already have, then you may not even need to pull for his signature weapon. But let's see how that goes. Alright. So kit summary wise. So after going through all of this, after spending 45 minutes talking about Wanderer's kit and all the latest changes as well, the comparison between previous and the latest changes, I'll say he's a breath of fresh air compared to last few characters, because we have been in the Sumeru meta now for like what, 2 months, 3 months? Thereabout, right? We always require EM as part of their kit. So now we are back to good old hyper carry 5-star, where EM is a useless stat. So his normal attack talent multiplier is actually pretty strong, with a good NA focus on his kit. My only complaint for him is how charge attack is kind of forced here, where you use just one at the start for the new artifact effect, because the new artifact effect requires you to use a charge attack before you get the NAC APA bonuses, which just got buffed recently from 30 to 40%. And since his signature weapon doesn't increase his charge attack, right? That's the biggest problem I have. But then again, if you look at it, right, if his signature weapon increases both normal attack and charge attack, it will become way too flexible and OP, I guess. Too versatile. So yeah. And another thing is that his C6 also only pros for charge attack. Sorry, for normal attacks. So the whole charge attack not requiring stamina is kind of wasted on him. And Yunjin buffs also only work for normal attack. I do see some potential to do N2C strings, because at least now with the recent drop in the talent multipliers, the CA does have a bigger advantage over the N3. But if you have C6, again, you don't need to use charge attack, because that C6 40% is double on the N3. It will definitely be higher than the charge attack. So charge attack is tough, right? Like the potential to do N2C strings, right, is only in specific conditions. Like you shouldn't have C6, you don't have his signature weapon, no Yunjing, no Candice, because Candice is also only buffing normal attack. Even C6 Soma is also only buffing normal attack. Oh, wait, C6 Soma may buff charge attack. I need to double check on that. But what I'm trying to say here is that there are a lot more normal attack buffs compared to charge attack buffs. So yeah, it's pretty unfortunate. Like I was so looking forward to be able to have a character that spams charge attack without running out of stamina. It's not optimized for him in that manner of playstyle. Now, to me, Wanderer is like the animal version of Itto, a specific elements hyper carry without reliance on amplifying reactions like Vape or Melt, with the added benefit of Sword versus Crystallize, right? But a low EM Sword is not that high in damage anyway. It's really more about application for your sub DPS or sub elemental application. Now, I have not done the math, so I can't say for sure whether Wanderer or Itto is better. But my Itto actually does like 80 to 100k per charge attack per 0.5 seconds. So it's 160 to 200k every second at C6R5 during his E mode. Sorry, during his Q mode. So it's not going to be easy for him to match. But even if Wanderer doesn't, right, as long as the damage is still good, it's still not so bad, because airborne attacking is fun. It's still worthwhile to use him and have fun with him. Right? Come on, how cool is it? Is it that you are airborne, you can move up and down and do attacks, stuff like that? Although, you know, moving up does reduce your NA DPS window. But yeah, you get what I'm trying to say, right? It's a fun character. Although I can tell you Itto is very fun as well, because it's unga banga. Alright, so moving forward, I will exclude solo damage figures since it's kind of pointless, right? It's always about the comms. Wanderer's ICD, there's no information on this that I can find yet. If anyone has this, it would be great if you can share. But anyway, reactions aren't a big part of its overall DPS, so no biggie. Wanderer's E looks to be providing 2 particles every 2 seconds in his airborne mode from gameplay videos, kind of like how Hu Tao and Yoimiya works, where you go into a stance and then you get energy over time, provided that you are continuously attacking. If I'm not wrong. I'm not sure whether you need to continuously attack, but either way, you will be continuously attacking anyway, right? Once you go into his E. Now, earlier leads did state that it's 1 particle every 2 seconds, but since the gameplay videos came later than the earlier leads, right? I'll just take it that it's 2 particles every 2 seconds. Okay? Now, in terms of Wanderer's comms, it's basically hyper carry. Many different variants of the hyper carry comp with different elements as well. So I'll address those in the future Wanderer Math guides. Quite a few options really. I suppose you can use him as a driver too, but given his high talent multipliers, honestly speaking, I'd rather build him in hyper carry rather than as a driver. I mean, you already have a very, very good driver in terms of Sucrose, right? Who naturally builds off of high EM as well too, and provides EM to the team. Why would you need Wanderer to fulfill that role? You're forcing it, right? I think hyper carry is his optimized build, which is why when it comes to the comps, I'll do different variants of hyper carry comp. Yeah. Alright, so TLDR, Wanderer looks really fun. His damage looks good too. I have to do the specific math to see if he can hit OP figures, but the good thing is that he's a hyper carry without reliance on Melt or Vape, because I'm sick of those two reactions. And I don't expect him to do better personal damage than Itto, because Itto's comps have lesser reaction damage and sub DPS damage too, right? So if you think in terms of overall team DPS, I think a C6R5 Wanderer may be able to match Itto if you include the other team members, which also means that you need to invest in the other team members. So I don't know whether I should still call it a hyper carry, but yeah, maybe a carry, not a hyper carry. Okay, so anyway, for hyper carry comps, due to having more options now, he does have a few variants for his comp. I'll talk more about those in future math guides. For details on the energy generation, NCT, etc., do check out the specific sections. Now the beta has not ended, so I will update the changes when we have either updated data information or at least leaks with screen crashes or updated talent changes. Okay? But I think it should be okay because I didn't start Wanderer Math like so early compared to Nahida. And more importantly, I even waited one more day for the second round of the changes. Second round of the beta changes for Wanderer. So I think we are in a good state with regards to changes coming our way. Should not have too many changes after this. Alright. So I finished the detailed kick analysis for Wanderer. Next up will actually be Layla Math Guide 1, because Layla is coming soon, right? I should at least do one Math Guide for her. I've already decided how I'm going to build her. I already have the artifacts for her, I already have the weapon for her, etc. And then you have the Faruza Math Guide 1 that I need to talk about too. So that context is there when I talk about them with Wanderer. Okay? And it's important. It's important to have the context. But they are new 4-star characters, I understand, which is why I say that I will do Wanderer Hyper Carry comp variants with other characters like, you know, Bennett and Yunjing and Toma and Zhongli, stuff like that. So characters that people have a higher chance of having, especially Layla. Layla is not even with any new 5-star character. I think I may just start at C0 Layla, to be honest. Yeah. If I didn't remember wrongly, C4 Layla also provides a flat damage bonus, which can be helpful for Wanderer. But let's see how that goes, because I already have C6 Yae and I think my child is C5. So not very worthwhile for me to put on that banner. For Layla, I mean more constellations for Layla. So other than comp, I will obviously talk about artifact comparison, because his artifact is a new artifact that is coming in 3.3. We all need time to farm for it. So we have to talk about what's the next best, right? So that's where the artifact comparison comes in. But at least for the initial math guides, right, in terms of the comp, I will use his best artifact. Okay? And obviously we have to do weapon comparison and specific weapon math, and then the constellation and refinement comparison. Alright? So anyway, thanks everyone for taking the time to watch this. I know I spent a little too much time talking about his kit, but I really wanted to go into detail, especially comparing the previous beta version versus the current as well, and the impact of those changes too. So technically speaking, I'm basically doing two math guides into one really. I could have released this yesterday, even before the time that the video is published today. But I have to do one more further update on top of that. So I rather just do everything in one video so that it's neater. Although it makes the video longer. Okay, anyway, thanks everyone for watching. I'll see you guys next video. If you like the content, remember the video and click subscribe for more. Bye.